Welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Dean Obidala, and today we're joined by Ruth Ben-Ghiat, an expert on authoritarianism, a college professor, and author of the book Strongman Mussolini, the Present, and a must-read Substack newsletter focused on authoritarianism titled Lucid. Thanks for being here, Ruth. I know you for years discussing issues, and now it seems even more important than ever to talk about authoritarianism and where we are as a nation.
Yeah, it's incredible that it could be upon us. And here's Trump saying he's going to be a dictator for day one, but we know that they're never dictators for day one. They never relinquish their powers. So it's extremely important to understand what we're up against.
So, you know, what you touched on about him saying I want to be a dictator for day one, and the fact he's charged with 91 felonies, including 32 counts of violating the Espionage Act, and for attempted coup. And the GOP base loves him. And to me, Trump could do whatever he wants. What's far more concerning is how many millions of Americans support him. What do you take from that?
It's sadly, it's like in history, when these charismatic demagogues come to power and they use emotions to manipulate people. Trump says, I love you to his people. He told them he loved them on January 6th. He builds a personality cult, so he poses as the victim, which is really important because not only all of his crimes get presented as persecutions by the deep state, but actually being the victim and saying you're persecuted makes his followers feel that protective of him. And you have quotes from people, MAGA people, saying, oh, you know, it's so distressing, we have to be there for him. And that's what January 6th was. It was many things. Right. It was a violent coup attempt, but he was a leader in distress and he called on people. He brought them to the rally and then they responded. So they were trying to rescue him, which is, you know, and this happens in history, and only later I have quotes in Strongman of people actually, you know, fascists sitting in jail in 1945 where they're like, oh, I was completely magnetized by Mussolini. I didn't realize what was going on. So that's how I see it.
And is history in any way warning us about the fact that Trump has not been held accountable by the system itself, that there was such a delay to investigate him? Then he's charged, he's been doing through his lawyers, manipulating the system to keep him on the ballot and maybe not even have any of the serious criminal trials before Election Day. And
now the Supreme Court. It's very disheartening, and no one is going to save the American people. And my mantra has always been never underestimate the American people. You know, we had the Women's March, we had Black Lives Matter. These were the largest protests in history, and they led to electoral in the midterms in 2018, 2022. We've got to do it. We can't depend on our institutions, which is very sad in a democracy. But our democracy has been so damaged, and including the Supreme Court, with Justice Thomas, who wouldn't recuse. There's a whole attempt to delegitimize democracy, and not just Biden, but the whole system. And so we have to do this from the ground up.
So when you look at the MAGA base now, from an academic point of view, is MAGA an authoritarian movement? Is it a fascist movement? Like, where does it fall?
It's pretty fascist.
Okay. Why?
I mean, the reason I wrote Strongman was to have this 100-year history of authoritarianism, and almost all right-wing, because that's my specialty. But obviously, communists, you know, had a higher body count than fascism, so I could have put them in there. But for narrative and other things, I have right-wings. And fascism was the first stage of authoritarianism, but it continued in different forms, like the Cold War military dictatorships. And Trump, you know, he's very similar to Mussolini in many ways. And so his followers, like, it checks all the boxes, where it's this huge, like, right-wing counter-revolution against, you know, the loss of white male privilege. And it's to save civilization. And the whole Great Replacement theory, which, you know, that's big in the MAGA base, that non-whites and non-Christians are having too many babies, we're going to be extinguished. Mussolini talked about this too. So you can basically track a whole series of checkpoints and talking points, and they're pretty much the same.
So you do see, so when people hear the word fascism, without doing like a long explanation of what's the core fascism, and why is it that you as an academic look at MAGA and say, yep, it's now fascist?
So Mussolini actually, who was a journalist, he was a great sloganeer, he gave, obviously he created fascism. So one very simple definition, he called it a revolution of reaction. And both those things are true because it upends everything, it disrupts everything, it uses violence. Fascists believe that violence is the way to change history. And Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida, he came to the Iowa State Fair to help Trump in the summer. People are eating their corn dogs and there's kids there. And he says, only through force will we bring change to corrupt DC. And this is after the coup that tried to do that. So that's the revolution part. And people are given permission to be their most violent selves, their worst selves. It's a collapse of morals. The reaction is what I was saying before, where you want to turn the clock back to the good old days, right? So MAGA is make the nation great again by going back to times when, women knew their place as, non-whites and non-Christians, and so things were as they should be. So this is the part of authoritarianism, which is also a set of attitudes about child rearing, about traditions, about like male authority. And so all of that, Trump says, is threatened. And so the MAGA base is responding to that.
So when you hear, as an expert in authoritarianism, Donald Trump defending the people who attacked the Capitol violently, calling them hostages, saying they've been treated unfairly, and pledging to pardon them, does that raise red flags to you? And if it does, what does it mean?
Totally. So one of the major things that fascists did and Trump is doing, he's been doing this through his rallies with actually frightening relentlessness, is to change the perception of violence, to get people to see that violence is not negative, including violence against your neighbors, or that you're going to look the other way when your neighbor's deported, right? That violence is sometimes morally necessary and even righteous and even patriotic. And he used his rallies since 2015, and I wrote about this for my report for the January 6th committee, where he'd say, in the old days, we used to be able to beat people up and nothing happened. So this is thug talk, right? So this is part of fascism, right? So January 6th becomes this righteous, stop the steal. And so the people who have been arrested and are sitting in jail, they become patriots. And he almost is doing what we call sacralizing violence, giving violence a kind of ritual, religious tone to it. So in his rallies, he has the January 6th Prisoners Choir sing. This is totally fascist. So, Trump has these fascist spectacles. And I wrote an essay for my Lucid when he kicked off his campaign at Waco, Texas, like what a choice. And he had the choir and he had like the spectacle of it reminded me of Hitler's Nuremberg rallies. So I think I entitled my essay, this was for my Substack newsletter, Triumph of the Will, Waco version. So he knows exactly what he's doing because he's a showman. He's a man of TV, he's a man of the camera. And it's really scary and it really works. And so that's what all of that is about. The pardons are about encouraging people to do more violence, thinking that they're not going to pay any consequences. And that's actually the essence of authoritarianism and fascism, is that you arrange government so that you can be violent and corrupt and get away with it.
So when he is saying, I'm going to pardon you for committing these crimes, then the message, a lot of it is not just to help those people for the future, that if you commit crimes for me, as we get closer to the election to help me win, I will do the same for you.
That's right. And so we're also always wanting to talk about not just Trump, but the enablers. So Paul Gosar, Representative Paul Gosar, who should not be anywhere near government, in my opinion, who hangs out with Nazis. He was promising people pardons to get them, all the thugs he knew, all the right-wingers who were violent, he was trying to get them to come and be in January 6th by promising them pardons. Because Trump had just pardoned all these, violent people like Roger Stone and Michael Flynn and Bannon. And so that's the environment. And all authoritarians use pardons. Because why do you want people sitting in jail, or when they could, the worst people in the world who for you are the best people, when they could be serving you? So Mussolini, Pinochet, they all use pardons to free up the people they need. It's really awful, but this is where we are.
The fact that you know all this, does it scare you more? I mean, do you feel like just screaming in the streets like, hey, everyone, I'm telling you, this is really bad what we're seeing?
I do, and it's a little eerie that things are unfolding like exactly as they have. Not exactly as they have in the past, because it always looks different, which is why some people don't see it's coming. Because no, we're not 1930s Germany, even though Trump's saying, I hope the economy crashes, which is the Hitler playbook.
Right.
But it redoubles my mission to speak out and to warn people. And the challenge is to reach more people now, to reach the people who usually don't vote, who have no idea. There was a poll that appeared that was very disturbing that said, I forgot what percent, but a lot of Americans, they've never heard Trump's authoritarian declarations. They'd never even heard it. And some of them don't know about his crimes because they don't follow the news at all.
Is some of the concern that you have as an historian that the fact that there are Americans who sincerely believe it can't happen here, and it being fascism and authoritarianism and the end to self-determination as a people?
Oh, absolutely. And even when I'm speaking to people, and there are people who have come to hear me, so they know what I'm about. When I say things like the GOP is an autocratic entity, or it's become autocratic, and I don't use the word fascist often, you can see that they're kind of, well, this is a little exaggerated, because it's like a mental divide between what we hear about abroad and what we are. And in the meantime, they're going to pick their kid up from school, they're going to the gym, and they don't have any conception of how their lives would be affected. So it just seems like some blathering by a professor, and that is frustrating.
So also sticking to Trump and what he says, at a rally recently, he mocked President Biden's stutter. And at another rally at the end of last year, he made fun of Paul Pelosi, who's a man in his 80s, Nancy Pelosi's husband, hit in the head with a hammer. And Trump doing that is one thing. What is more bone-chilling to me is when Trump makes fun of Paul Pelosi, the crowd cheered and laughed. Mm-hmm. When the stutter, the crowd cheers and laughs. What does that indicate to you?
This is part of his remarketing of violence as positive. That's the Pelosi part. So that, and there's a reason that threats to members of Congress and their families are up like 400%.
Right.
But the mocking, the speech impediment is about cruelty, right? And to have an autocracy, you need people to be cruel. You need them to think that solidarity and empathy and kindness are for weak people. And that's totally fascist. That's what fascism is in fact, Mussolini, who like Hitler read Nietzsche, this philosopher of the Uberman and all this, he took away from it that if somebody is weak and they're on a cliff, you should just push them because they're useless to society. And that's the philosophy. So when Trump is mocking people, and he also made fun years ago of a New York Times reporter who had a disability. So and the disabled, just to take that theme for a second, have always been persecuted by fascists and others.
I mean, Hitler has a very dark history with what he did to disabled people. So we're living in what about how President Biden responds? And that President Biden gave a State of the Union. He referred to his predecessor, not Trump by name. That's a choice he's made. He referred to him, my predecessor, numerous times, but raised alarms about him. Yeah. How is that, and what more, if it should be more, Biden should be doing in terms of the way he talks about Donald Trump to alert our fellow Americans?
I was glad that he was doing that. You have to respond forcefully. And this whole thing is partly, including Putin's maneuvers in Ukraine. Biden came to office, and his first press conference, he said, we've got to prove democracy works. Mm-hmm. So from the very beginning, he was going to not only in the country, save democracy, but prove it works abroad and stop these people. And he had a a summit with Putin in the summer of 2021. And they sat there, and Putin was placed as an equal, like visually, and they had the globe between them. It was in Geneva. And I looked at Putin, because I live in these people's heads, unfortunately, and I got a really bad feeling that, and he was also being grilled by the US press, and including by female journalists, and he didn't like that at all.
Putin?
Yes, yes, Putin. And he was put on the spot by a female American journalist. And I thought, this is bad, because there was something about him. And so that night, I wrote for my Lucid newsletter that Putin could become very reckless over the next months, because he felt extremely threatened that Biden was there instead of Trump. It was a nightmare for him that Trump didn't win. Mm-hmm. He was risking a whole lot. And so then we know what happened. He went into Ukraine, and before that, he and China allied. They made their formal alliance statements. And so all of this, one way to read it is because of Biden's commitment to democracy. So the fact that now, after January 6th, he's there, he almost didn't make it in office, now he's there. And we're at the showdown. And so I think he needs to be even more forceful, but he's at least stepped up.
So Trump recently invited to Mar-a-Lago, which I call his crime lair, he invited Viktor Orban, the head of Hungary, and said about Viktor Orban, there's no one that's better, smarter, or a better leader than Viktor Orban. He's fantastic. What alarm bells go off when you hear that from Donald Trump?
Trump has actually been conditioning Americans to see authoritarian leaders like Orban as positive role models, as well as saying, I'm going to be a dictator.
Right.
So one of the interesting things he said after that, he said, Orban is a non-controversial leader because he says this is the way it's going to be and everybody accepts it. End of discussion. So what Trump is saying is that dictating what you're going to do, which is dictator, and everybody just submits, shouldn't be controversial. It's how it's going to be. So he's using these visits not just to curry favor with these autocrats and whatever dirty deals they're going to have. And it's all about Putin because Orban is a client of Putin. But he's using these occasions to keep indoctrinating Americans that this is the leadership they're going to have.
Well, and certainly it resonates with some on the base. I mean, I see these interviews where people are like, yes, he'll be a dictator just in the beginning to get everything right. And you're like, you're not upset that he'll be a dictator because he'll be your dictator. That's the way it is. Like if Biden said, I want to be a dictator, the right would go ballistic. And they should.
They already say he's a dictator.
Right, they say...
That's what I call the upside down world of authoritarianism. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, they talk about the Biden regime. And Mussolini did this, that liberal democracy is tyranny. Fascism is freedom. And then we get all the way to Auschwitz, where in the Nazi version, where the gates of Auschwitz said, work will set you free. So that's the upside down world of authoritarianism.
And Trump at his rallies were, again, recently saying that Biden's a threat to democracy.
Yeah, that's
not me. And it's like only one of you has been charged with felonies for attempting a coup, and only one of you had your followers attack our Capitol to prevent the certification and the transfer of power. But to the base of his followers, that's fine. At some point, people in the middle, I'm hoping they're going to tune in more. So when you look at, we're 7-8 months out of the election right now. As we get closer, do you have concerns about violence by MAGA?
I do because they're being egged on. In fact, today there was a news item out of Kansas that there was a fundraiser held, and Kansas Republicans have disavowed this and denounced it. But they were using an effigy of Biden and encouraging people to attack it. And so this kind of violence against, and already the violence against and threats against election officials, against anybody who is trying to hold Trump accountable or protect democracy, could easily, because of our lax gun laws, go into violence as the election nears.
I saw a clip of that, and I think that the older white MAGA people probably suffered worse when they try to kick and hit the Biden doll, because it didn't look, I'm sure a lot of them have ice on themselves now, but I could laugh about that, but in the bigger picture, there's a grave concern what's going on. If Trump loses in 2024. Do you expect a similar scenario after 2020? The election was rigged, even calling for another January 6th type attack?
I do. And one thing that sometimes I'll have these thoughts and then they come to me and I'm like, oh, that's not good. It's very interesting, when a president loses and a new one's going to come in, there's a transition team. And that transition team is activated after the election is known, the results. Project 2025, which has tens of thousands of people, 70 organizations, it builds itself as a transition team. But I don't know, hundreds and thousands or probably millions of dollars are being spent with giant staffs to plan a transition as though they think that whatever happens, they're coming into power. So that is disturbing, and that's a part of Project 2025 we haven't thought about. Why are they doing all this if it's going to be a free and a fair election and they could lose?
It's a great question. And Project 2025 is just concerning in that if they were to win, what they would do. But the other side didn't even think about, like, if they lose, do they have some other plan B that we don't know about? In the last couple of questions here, one is, obviously it's important for President Biden as a defender of democracy to adhere to democratic norms. And I think that's important. And in the book, How Democracies Die, they talk about that a great deal. But right now, we're faced with a situation where if Trump becomes the formal nominee, which is expected after the convention, tradition says they give a national intelligence briefing to that person. And now there's a debate about should Biden give it or not. One people in the administration said, oh, they would, but then Karine Jean-Pierre, White House Press Secretary, said, no, we suspended them, nothing has changed. Do you think the fact that Trump is who he is, the threat that he is, he's actually charged with felonies for his mishandling of classified document and sharing it, is it in the best interest of Biden to adhere to this tradition that goes back to the time of Truman, or to alert our fellow Americans, like, he's not getting a briefing because of how dangerous this man is?
Somebody who had instigated a violent coup to overthrow the government does not, and kept classified documents in his bathroom of his private residence, is not exactly trustworthy. And it's not just Trump, it's also Jared Kushner. We need to be investigating how he came out of the Trump administration immediately into the hands of the Saudis. So it's a whole flow of illicit money and networks that absolutely he cannot be briefed. If that happens, that's actually very naive.
Right. And I think it's also a good way to tell people things aren't normal. We're not giving him a briefing.
That's right.
That's how dangerous he is. If Trump wins in 2024, do you think he leaves office peacefully in 2028, 2029?
No, he'll never leave. And if he falls ill or something, then there's other Trumpers waiting in the wings. It's a dynasty. You could even see, they're talking about Jared Kushner as Secretary of State, which would be perfect for criming, for corruption. You don't know what will happen, but they build dynasties, and Trump has always had a family business. And his two sons are not exactly equipped to take on high public office, but there are other people around. Lara Trump was just put in charge of the RNC, Republican National Committee, so that every penny will go to this classic corruption. Mm-hmm. So it could be anyone. It could be Lara Trump, who knows, as long as they keep control.
It's interesting, talking to you, Ruth, it's almost surreal that we're living through something that, instead of me reading about a history of another country. And the very last thing, because people all want to know, like, how's this going to end? I think it's a question we all have through life. But with MAGA, if Trump ends up being convicted, he loses the election, he's convicted, put in prison, with movements like authoritarian movements from the past, any guide, is that a way that it can end up fragmenting the organization? There might be remnants of it, it weakens it, or no?
Yeah, and there are polls showing that if he's actually convicted and sent to jail, they become irrelevant. And we can contrast what has happened after January 6th here with Brazil, where they had a coup in 1964, a military coup. They had over 20 years of horrible dictatorship with torture and all kinds of things that only ended in 1985. So their people, the political class, the judges, they all know they were there, or their kids were there, or their parents were there. So Bolsonaro has been, so they had a January 8th insurrection. But he has been banned from politics until 2030. And so his popularity is going down because they become irrelevant. Same thing without an insurrection, Berlusconi in Italy, who had, Trump has what, 4 indictments? Berlusconi had over 20. And he had 14 major corruption trials, and he was finally convicted 2 years after he left office. And banned from politics for 5 years. That's when his amazing, formidable personality cult shriveled. Because personality cults they're like plants. You've got to water them. You got to tend to them, and they need the person to be viable and active. If they're in jail or they're banned from politics, that's what you need to end them. And so I hope to goodness that happens.
Me too. Ruth, it's always a pleasure and frightening to speak to you. As all through these years, and it continues to be. But thank you for being on Salon Talks. Thanks for watching. I'm Dino Bidala.